2024 was a tough year for Williams. The mechanics stayed busy pretty much since the beginning of the season, but let's just focus on three specific races: Mexico, Brazil, and Las Vegas, because that's where things get really bad and really expensive. In Mexico, there were two accidents involving Williams cars. The first was when Alex Albon made contact with Ollie Behrman during FP1 after coming across the slow Ferrari in the high-speed sweeps, probably costing Williams over $500,000 in damage. When race day finally came, as soon as the lights went out going into turn 1, Alex Albon would make contact with Yuki Tsunoda, again sending him into retirement. At the next race in Brazil, things would get even worse when Franco Colapinto lost control during Q1 in qualifying. And then later on that same session, Alex Albon would lose the car under braking going into turn 1, causing millions in damage. Despite the team's best efforts, Albon wasn't able to make the start of the race as a result of his accident, but Williams mechanics were able to repair Colapinto's car in time for the race. But on lap 32, while running under the safety car due to the appalling conditions, Colapinto crashed again while he was climbing the hill onto the main straight, destroying the entire left-hand side of his car, obviously ending his race. This was 5 crashes for Williams over just 2 race weekends, and the team is starting to have a hard time keeping up with the repairs. The accidents in Mexico and Brazil meant that the team had to go through 5 front wings, 5 rear wings, 3 gearboxes, 2 engines, 2 chassis, and who knows how many wheels, wheel bearings, brake assemblies, cooling ducts, and suspension components. All very expensive stuff. During the 2-week break between the Brazilian and Las Vegas Grand Prix, the mechanics at the factory had to work flat out in order to salvage any parts that were still serviceable, as well as manufacture replacements for parts that were beyond repair. James Vowles, the team principal for the Williams team, said in an interview with ESPN that the repair costs for just these 5 accidents were in the millions.
Less than 10, more than 3. It's big numbers when you calculate where we are at the moment.
Less than 10, but more than 3. That's a big range, but even on the lower end of that spectrum, $3 million is an insane amount of money to spend on only repairs over 2 weekends, especially during the cost cap era of Formula 1, where each team only has so much that they're allowed to spend on car development, and this includes the manufacturing of spare and replacement parts. Through what James called a gargantuan effort, the team was able to show up for the Las Vegas Grand Prix with 2 fully up-to-date cars. But the pressure was on. The team needed to end the season with 3 clean races, otherwise they'd be heavily compromising their development for 2025 due to the cost cap. They can't afford to keep having these accidents, not to mention they're running out of spare parts, saying that if we continue to have accidents like Brazil, we're going to be in big trouble, but hopefully that's a one-off. So what do you think happened during qualifying for the Las Vegas Grand Prix?
Nobody goes fastest, and that's Franco Colapinto as the Williams splutters to a halt.
Not another Williams in the wall.
The looks on the mechanic's face tell you everything you need to know. This was another expensive one for the team. New front wing, rear wing, all 4 corners of the car need to be rebuilt, new suspension, new wheels, new brakes. It was a 50G impact, so that means new drive shafts, differential, and gearbox. Williams also had to replace the chassis itself after the accident, so this was almost certainly another 7-figure repair bill. Over the 2023 season, Logan Sargent would cause more damage than anybody else on the grid, totaling over $4 million in repairs over the course of a single season. When Lance Stroll lost control in qualifying during the Singapore Grand Prix, the repair bill for that one crash alone was $1,262,000. Along that same vein, when Mick Schumacher crashed in Jeddah during qualifying back in 2022, that repair was also around the $1 million mark. The point is, Formula 1 cars are expensive, costing anywhere from $150 to $400 million to develop and over $20 million to produce. This makes repairing them obviously expensive too. Due to the open-wheel nature of Formula 1, components like wheels, tires, brakes, and suspension are the most common to get damaged. And repairing damaged or broken suspension components can easily cost over $150,000. The brakes themselves cost $66,000, with front wings costing $250,000. Teams often show up to races with multiple front wings because they're so susceptible to damage because of the sport's open-wheel format, like I said. And if the front wing takes damage, it'll affect the airflow over the rest of the car behind it, meaning that when that end plate falls off, you need to replace it in the pits. So even relatively mild damage like when Lance Stroll tried to kill Latifi in Australia, or again last year at the Mexican Grand Prix when Albon and Tsunoda made contact, it isn't uncommon for these repairs to cost teams over $500,000 a piece. Every time you see a team replace a front wing in the pits, that's a hurricane. And damage to the rear end can be even worse, because not only do you have expensive suspension and aerodynamic components like you do at the front, but you also have drive axles which are $2,000 a piece, the differential and also the gearbox which can be up to $350 $50,000, and the engine itself, which can be well over $10 million. Formula One engines themselves are actually pretty resilient pieces of equipment, but anytime you have damage to the rear end of the car, it almost always means trouble for the gearbox because there isn't anything back there to absorb that blow. And whenever you have a big accident or a head-on collision, there's almost certainly going to be other systems that need to be repaired or replaced also. The pedal box in F1 costs $9,600, a new wiring harness is nearly $40,000, the steering wheel is over $50,000, the various hydraulic systems running through the car that control things like the clutch or the brakes can easily be over $150,000, the floor can be $126,000. The price racks up fast when you consider that all of these systems can take severe damage and need to be replaced anytime a car goes into a barrier. One of the more expensive parts that you'll find on an F1 car besides the actual engine is the monocoque chassis, also known as the survival cell. It's the part of the car that you sit in and that everything else attaches to. It's made up with as many as 12 layers of carbon composites and is supplemented with aluminum honeycomb, Kevlar, as well as a heat and fire resistant material known as Normex to protect the driver in case there's a fire. This chassis is the skeleton of Formula One cars and is part of the reason the sport has gotten so safe. Its job is to absorb the impact so that your body doesn't have to, which makes its price tag of $700,000 seem like a bargain considering how many lives it saved. Because it's such a crucial part of the car, and because it's so safety critical being the only thing that protects whoever is inside of it, it needs to be replaced anytime there is a significant wreck. Even if the chassis of Colapinto's car was structurally okay after his crash in Las Vegas, because the impact was so intense, there was just no way they could continue to use it in good conscience without putting his life in danger should an accident like that happen again. But speaking financially, it's expensive to have to replace her chassis 3 times in only 3 race weekends. And Formula One being well into the cost cap era at this point doesn't make things any easier. This is why a team like Williams is having such a hard time. Even though each team is allowed to spend up to $135 million for the 2024 season, that streak of crashes that I was talking about at the beginning of the video has racked up such a big repair bill that it's starting to eat into the team's budget that they had allocated for 2025. The teams can't just go ahead and manufacture a whole load of spare wings and suspension components and spare floors in case anything happens. The cost cap was also a problem for teams when it was first introduced. In 2021, when Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen were fighting, both Christian Horner and Toto Wolff were heard complaining about how the repairs for the crashes were eating into the budgets that they needed to try and outdevelop one another. Damage to Max Verstappen's car over the course of the 2021 season amounted to nearly $4 million, with almost half of that alone being attributed solely to his clash with Lewis in Silverstone, where his car was completely and utterly destroyed after he hit the wall at 160 miles an hour. It was a 51G impact, and even then there was a huge effort by Red Bull and Honda to try and save the power unit so that it wouldn't need to be replaced. This was of course partly because they didn't want to have to take what would be a very costly engine penalty later in the season, which they ended up having to do anyways. But also, like we already discussed, the engines are by far the most expensive part of the car. To have the engine that was involved in this crash running in FP1 in Hungary only 2 weeks later was a huge accomplishment by Honda. They would end up discovering a potential structural issue after qualifying that same weekend and would swap out his engine for a new one just to be safe for the race on Sunday. But the fact that it was running at all is a testament to the incredible power unit that Honda had built. During the cost cap era of Formula One, teams have to be very careful where they spend money and where they allocate resources. There's a reason drivers are often so apologetic after an accident. Not only for the mechanics who now have to stay up all night fixing a damaged car, but also for the team back at the factory who have to find a way to fix the hundreds or potentially thousands of parts, all expensive, without bankrupting the team or pushing them over the limits of what they're allowed to spend. Everybody loves crashes, provided that everybody is okay, of course. There's a reason the most viewed videos on the F1 YouTube channel are all about them, but the teams, not so much. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.